Hello, folks. My name is Garvin, and I mostly talk about books and mythology on the internet. Today, we're continuing our discussion about kidnapping. Now, this is going to cover some dark stuff such as child endangerment, loss of loved ones, violence, and more. So, if that's going to upset or disturb you, please feel free to skip this video. Maybe look at my other videos, or not. I'd rather y'all took care of yourselves out there than gave me views on YouTube. So please take care of yourself, and hopefully you'll be back when we're covering more pleasant topics. Thank you. So last video we did a very broad overview of the topic with no examples given, which I could see as being somewhat frustrating for some folks. So today we're going to name some names and look at various kidnappers in folklore and mythology. Now I did name drop Zeus last video because just at a guess he's responsible for something like 25% of all abductions in Greek myth. So I feel using him in this video would be cheating, which is why he's not going to show up past this point. Now, if you do want me to make a video just about all the kidnappings that Zeus has done, leave a comment and I'll tell you what, if we break 10 likes, then yes, you guys can get a bonus Zeus kidnapping video. Good lord, this channel is getting dark. The most successful kidnappers in mythology tend to be gods, although, as we're going to see, that's not always a guarantee of success. Now, in modern times, the second most famous divine kidnapper for my money is Hades, but I'm going to save that for its own video. Poseidon, on the other hand, is known for attempting to kidnap his wife, failing, and having a dolphin talk her into the marriage. Another reason to never trust a dolphin, kids. He also kidnapped the hero Sinus, who was born a woman, but after being kidnapped and assaulted by Poseidon, wished to become a powerful man. This is a wish Poseidon granted, but I'm not giving him points for it. Another one of Poseidon's victims is the princess Theophane, who was not only kidnapped, but got turned into a sheep by him before he. Yeah. Poseidon has some twisted urges and is in need of therapy, if you ask me. Oh, to make this worse, this is where that golden fleece Jason had to fetch comes from. Moving on, Eos, the goddess of the dawn, is another wildly successful serial kidnapper, although she focuses her attention on men, and she's not the only goddess to do so. We also have Selûne, the moon goddess, who carried off a mortal man and even tried to break up his marriage when he firmly declined her attentions. She would also kidnap her crush, Endymion, who was granted immortality in sleep. Apollo has a whole string of attempted kidnappings, most famously Daphne, who eluded him by turning into a tree. He also attempted to kidnap the mortal princess Marpesia, but was foiled by her heroic betrothed Idas and his own father Zeus interfering because he's not letting the boy horn in on his racket. Lastly, in Greek mythology is Pan, whose reed flute is the result of him attempting to kidnap a nymph, but she escapes that fate by turning into a reed. On the flip side, the god of the north wind Borealis was successful when he kidnapped an Athenian princess. Unlike a lot of other kidnapped victims, though, she would get promoted to a goddess in her own right. Before moving on, I should note this is not an exhaustive list, but should give you an idea of how much kidnapping is going on in just Greek mythology. Moving past Greek mythology, we have the Slavic deity Veles, or Welaz, who kidnapped Perun's son and raised him as his own. Veles is an underworld god, so this is often used to explain why lightning hits the ground so much. The boy in question grows up to be the god of springtime, perhaps because Velas is also the god of cattle in lowlands. Now, over in Ireland, the sea god Manannán mac Lir doesn't do his own kidnapping. He hires bards. That turns into a tragedy, but I'll return to this one, so stick a pin in it. On the more benevolent side, we have the Norse moon god Mani, who would kidnap a pair of abused children to keep them from their abusive father. So, they're not all bad, I guess. We also have wizards and various immortal beings who commit kidnappings for a variety of reasons. In Slavic folklore, the grim wizard Koschei the Deathless is a notorious kidnapper who is usually foiled by the quest. This is often resolved in a chase, as I mentioned in the last video. Considering how many stories there are of him kidnapping someone and dying at the end, I think he earns his title in more ways than one, too. There's also Rothbart the Owl Sorcerer from Swan Lake, who kidnaps the Princess Odette and turns her into a swan, which is one way I suppose to throw off rescuers. The most common supernatural kidnappers are non human beings, and there is a staggering list of them. Again, I'm not even going to try to be exhaustive here, but there are some that jumped out at me, and I want to hit the highlights. Fairies take pride of place in this category as they are infamous for kidnapping men, women, and children. Adults are usually seduced mortals who are at least mostly agreeable with their kidnapping, but not always. Of course, there are also the children of changeling myth. Interestingly enough, a lot of myths claim that fairies preferred boys, and some of my sources say this is where the tradition of dressing boys up in frocks come from, so fairies can't tell boys from girls until they're too old to take. The children who were taken would be replaced by changelings, who, depending on the tradition, were either fairy babies in ill health, elderly fae, or objects enchanted to look like the stolen child. Often, changelings would die in infancy, or at least appear to. Most of my sources say that human children taken by the fairies were raised by them either as their own or to become servants. Although in some Scottish traditions, the children that are taken to pay the fae court's tithe to hell, which I think we can all agree is a pretty dark fate. Over in Scandinavia, trolls would often play the same role, kidnapping children and leaving their own in exchange. There are a lot of reasons given. Among them is that trolls often think it's better that their children be raised by humans and think it's a fair trade since any human raised by trolls would grow up extra strong and hardy. Assuming the child survived, of course. Other child stealing monsters are nowhere near as kind. Most of them can be put under the title of boogeymen, and they share some universal characteristics. They target children who leave their family's protection or venture into dangerous areas, usually near water or high places. They steal these unattended children, and they love the taste of human flesh. A prime example of this is the Inuit Qualupiluit, which lurks under the ice and at the edge of water. If it finds an unattended child that it can lure out, it will stuff the child into a sack and drown the poor kid in ice water and eat it up. It's interesting to note that most boogeyman style monsters also have sacks or bags. Just random fact there. Other monsters focus on adults. For example, the Zhuan from China is an interesting example. I also just want to admit that I got different pronunciations from different guides, so if I screwed up that pronunciation, my deepest apologies. But they are rhesus monkeys who live to be 1,300 years old and then transform into humanoid apes that live in small mountain villages across southwest China. They have a slight problem in that they're all guys, so they'll sneak down from the mountains to kidnap women to bear their children. These women are only allowed to leave the village once they're pregnant. But if that woman doesn't do her best to raise the child, well, she's being followed and consequences will ensue. Strangely, children fathered by these monsters look just like normal human babies. Traditionally, they're also given the family name of Yang. Funny side note, I knew a guy in college with the last name Yang, and I wonder if he knew about this story. Oh, before I forget, the picture here was donated by webcomic author and artist Hungry Moth. I tripped over his bite-sized bestiary comic, and I found it very enjoyable and informative, and I'm including a link to it in the description below. He also has a fantasy comic called Owl Light Bridge, which I've been enjoying, so please check out the link below and tell them I said hi. Heading back to Western mythology, we have the Jotun, the giants of Norse mythology. Their targets are mostly the goddesses of Asgard. For example, we have the giant Thiassi kidnapping the goddess Idun. This is a serious blow to Asgard because she's also the keeper of the golden apples that keep the gods young and strong. In the end, it's up to Loki to fix this, mainly because he caused the problem in the first place. In the Wagner opera cycles, we also have a pair of Jotun named Fafnir and Fasolt, who, when cheated of their payment by Wotan for building Valhalla, kidnap the goddess Freya and hold her for ransom. This turns out badly for them, and they end up in a kind of Cain and Abel situation. Last but not least, we have mortals who do the kidnapping. Now, strangely enough, Russian czars are very heavily represented here. Without even trying, I found 3 different stories of czars sending someone out to kidnap a princess for them. Usually, the kidnapper is the protagonist of the story and ends up marrying the victim, who wants nothing to do with the czar, but is okay with marrying their kidnapper, our story's hero. Go figure. Heading back over to Greece, we have Theseus, who in some versions kidnapped Hippolyta, his first wife, kidnapped Phaedra, his second wife, who is the little sister of the Cretan princess who helped him kill the Minotaur in the first place, who he absconded Crete with and just kind of abandoned on an island. Folks who watched my Helen video will also know that he kidnapped Helen when she was a child, but met his match when he went into the underworld in an attempt to kidnap Hades' wife Persephone. Turns out Hades does not take that kind of thing well. Y'all have been warned. So we're going to wrap up here and hopefully be done in the next video. I'd like to thank my long-suffering patrons, especially my biggest supporter, Big Steve, and my longest-serving supporter, Crensby. I really appreciate your patience, guys. By the way, Crensby, your videos are next after we finish kidnapping. So, again, thank you. That said, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like or a comment, as that does help in my eternal struggle against the Dreadlord algorithm, terror beyond his name. Also, feel free to subscribe and ring that bell, or join my patrons at the link below where you can vote on upcoming content for as little as $1 a month. Join me next week, because we're going to talk about a couple of very famous kidnapping tales and put this to bed. Until then, y'all stay safe and keep reading.